The apostles' letters were not merely words. They carried the heart of a living message. Among them are accounts that may have been forgotten or deliberately silenced, documents that could reveal fascinating details about Jesus' childhood and the early steps of his divine mission. Why did these letters vanish? And what might they tell us about the lesser-known years of the one who changed the course of human history? If you've ever wondered what it would be like to uncover something so profound and transformative, get ready, because this is a journey into the unknown. But before we move forward, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share in the comments what you think these letters might reveal about Jesus' childhood. Let's uncover together the mysteries that humanity has tried to hide. The mystery of the apostles' lost letters echoes like a whisper throughout Christian history, an enigma that sparks the imagination about what might have been revealed. Why did some letters disappear while others were preserved? It's intriguing to consider that writings about Jesus' childhood, perhaps detailed in precious words, might have been hidden or destroyed. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, for example, showed the world how much there is still to learn about the biblical context. Have you heard of the Nag Hammadi texts? They remind us that many secrets were literally buried, waiting centuries to emerge. The Roman persecutions of Christians, particularly in the 1st and 2nd centuries, are a crucial point for understanding this disappearance. Imagine living in a time when possessing a letter from the apostles could mean your execution. These texts were considered precious but also dangerous. Many Christians chose to hide or even destroy them to protect their communities. After all, how could something so sacred be preserved in a context of constant threat? There are accounts of manuscripts being buried in caves, burned by soldiers, or simply abandoned during desperate escapes. The Council of Nicaea, held in 325 AD, is another significant landmark in this story. It was there that Christian leaders decided which texts would be considered inspired, a process that was as much theological as it was political. Have you ever stopped to think about what was left out? Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the foremost Christian historians, mentions texts that circulated among the early communities but were discarded for doctrinal reasons. Who decides what is heresy or truth? And more importantly, what might these letters teach us about Jesus and his childhood? Examples of texts that survived in fragments, such as the Gospel of Thomas or the Acts of Peter, show that the loss of Christian documents is not merely hypothetical. These writings offer fascinating glimpses into how early communities understood their faith. But what about letters that might recount Jesus' childhood? Is it possible that precious details about his early years are irretrievably lost, like pages torn from a book we long to complete? The story of the lost letters also reflects a larger pattern, the constant struggle between memory and forgetting. Just as the early Christians fought to preserve the apostles' words, we today strive to connect the fragments of this heritage, and in this effort, fascinating questions arise. Could new discoveries, like those in Qumran or Nag Hammadi, bring to light letters that reveal more about Jesus, or do the secrets remain buried, protected by the veil of time? Imagine reading a letter written by an apostle describing Jesus' childhood, perhaps an intimate moment shared by Mary with the disciples, or a reflection by the apostles on the first miracles of the boy Jesus. Such letters could transform our understanding of the Christian faith, offering rich details about a time that remains largely hidden. Yet, it's fascinating to realize that even with so many gaps, the Gospels we have today continue to inspire millions around the world. It is also fascinating to consider the role these letters could play in contemporary theology. Writings like the Proto-Evangelium of James, for instance, which was not included in the canon, already present a detailed narrative about Jesus' birth and early years. If more letters were discovered, how might they influence our understanding of his humanity and divinity? This reflection prompts us to consider the impact of these texts, not only on a spiritual level, but also on a historical one. As we reflect on the lost letters, we are naturally led to ponder the conditions of Jesus' childhood. How did he grow up? What teachings shaped his mind and heart? These questions lead us to the next topic, where we will explore the historical and cultural setting in which Jesus spent his early years. Jesus' childhood is shrouded in mystery, but the historical and cultural context of the time helps us imagine the environment in which he was raised. Nazareth, a small village in 1st century Galilee, was a simple place, with stone houses and roofs covered with branches. Archaeological discoveries suggest the village had a modest population and an economy based on agriculture and manual labor. Imagine Jesus accompanying Joseph in his carpentry tasks, learning the trade, and observing the daily life of a community deeply connected to the land. Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian of the period, describes Galilee as a region filled with social and political tensions, a melting pot where Jewish traditions clashed with the influence of the Roman Empire. In this environment, Jesus would have grown up aware of oppression and the messianic hopes that filled the hearts of his people. Children of the time were educated with stories of liberation, such as the Exodus, which shaped their worldview. It's not hard to imagine how these narratives might have inspired Jesus during his formative years. Jesus' religious education was also deeply influenced by synagogue practices and the study of the Torah. In Nazareth, the synagogue was the center of community life, where children learned to recite scriptures and understand the commandments. Jewish tradition emphasized education from an early age, and boys like Jesus were encouraged to memorize sacred texts. Have you heard of the episode where he taught in the temple at age 12? This moment reflects the importance of religious instruction during his childhood. Culturally, the Mishnah, a compilation of Jewish oral traditions, provides a glimpse into daily practices. It describes routines ranging from blessings before meals to teachings about compassion and justice. It's fascinating to think that these traditions shaped the values Jesus would carry throughout his life. While the stories of his childhood may be lost, the context allows us to understand the principles that guided his early steps. During this period, events like the Bar Mitzvah, a ceremony marking a young Jewish boy's coming of age, were beginning to take shape, signifying the transition from boyhood to a responsible member of the Jewish community. Although the ceremony lacked the formality we know today, it already reflected the importance of spiritual maturity. The episode of Jesus in the temple can be seen as a milestone in this process. He was not just learning, but also questioning, demonstrating a wisdom that astonished even the most experienced elders. Agricultural practices were also an integral part of this context. Archaeological studies in Nazareth show that the village relied on vineyards, wheat fields, and olive trees. Imagine Jesus helping with the harvest, learning patience and care for nature. These moments of simplicity likely shaped his ability to teach through parables connected to everyday life. After all, his future teachings often tied the spiritual to the tangible, as when he compared the kingdom of God to a mustard seed. The prophets of the Old Testament also played a crucial role in the cultural formation of the time. Passages like Isaiah 11:1-5, which speak of a branch growing from the root of Jesse, were read and debated. Messianic expectation was in the air, and Jesus, even as a child, would have heard these words repeatedly. It is intriguing to think that he grew up under the shadow of such prophecies while living an apparently ordinary life. This exploration of the historical and cultural context of Jesus' childhood brings us closer to his humanity. At the same time, it leads us to consider the apocryphal accounts that mention this phase of his life. The Proto-Evangelium of James is one such fascinating example. It narrates in rich detail the birth of Mary, her consecration at the temple, and the supernatural events surrounding Jesus' birth. One of the most striking elements is the description of the virgin birth, where a radiant light symbolizes the divine entering the world. This narrative, rejected for its emphasis on Mary's absolute purity, illustrates the fervor of a community that viewed Mary and Jesus as symbols of purity and redemption. Imagine the debates this text must have sparked in religious circles of the time. Another text worth noting is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, which offers a more controversial and, at times, unsettling portrayal of Jesus as a child. Accounts such as him shaping birds from clay and giving them life are not merely symbolic, but are laden with tensions about balancing his humanity and divinity. There are also stories where young Jesus demonstrates supernatural authority, such as healing a boy bitten by a snake or harshly punishing those who insulted him. These narratives often shock modern readers, but reveal how early Christian communities grappled with the complexity of a child God growing up among humans. The Arabic Gospel of the Infancy of Jesus presents another fascinating perspective. It describes miraculous episodes during the flight to Egypt, such as palm trees bowing before the Holy Family or Jesus purifying water sources. These accounts, rich in symbolism, frequently portray a child whose presence transformed everything around him. One curious episode tells of Jesus creating animals from clay to entertain other children. However, unlike the infancy gospel of Thomas, these miracles are gentler, reflecting a child Messiah with traits of compassion and creativity. The Proto-Evangelium of James also introduces figures like Salome, who witnesses the events surrounding Jesus' birth. Her reaction of doubt and subsequent conviction after touching Mary and being healed of her withered hand illustrates how these texts sought to address questions of faith and doubt among their audiences. These narratives attempt to fill gaps left by the canonical Gospels, often addressing themes that still intrigue us today. What was it like to grow up as the Son of God? Criticism of apocryphal texts, led by theologians like Origen and Tertullian, primarily focused on the excessive supernatural elements and what they deemed fantastical stories unsuitable for a mature theology. Nevertheless, these accounts echo the early community's longing to understand aspects of Jesus' life that the Gospels did not elaborate on. The Proto-Evangelium, for instance, explores Mary as the new Eve, emphasizing her central role in the narrative of redemption. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas also includes episodes that expand the understanding of Jesus' ministry as something continuous, stretching from his childhood into adulthood. Accounts such as Jesus resurrecting a childhood friend who had fallen from a roof exemplify the desire to portray his divinity as unbound by age or context. These texts, though rejected, can be seen as reflections on how the Messiah influenced those around him, even in the simplest moments. The Arabic Gospel of the Infancy similarly ties everyday miracles to the reality of families in flight. The scene of a palm tree offering shade and nourishment to the Holy Family during their flight into Egypt symbolizes divine provision amidst human suffering. These accounts, while often criticized for their miraculous simplicity, carry profound messages of hope and faith, particularly for communities facing persecution or exile. St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas analyzed these miracles with caution, viewing them as prefigurations of Jesus' public life. Augustine, for instance, argued that each miraculous act attributed to Jesus affirmed an identity already pointing to his redemptive mission. Thomas Aquinas saw these stories as a way to reinforce belief in Jesus as both fully human and fully divine from childhood. At the same time, both theologians recognized the risk of embellishments that could detract from the Gospel's central message. In some traditions, these miracles are seen as symbolic expressions. For example, narratives of Jesus healing the sick during his childhood can be interpreted as reminders that redemption transcends age or limitations. Even the episode where he rebukes other boys might be understood as demonstrating that power, even when misunderstood, serves a greater purpose. These stories challenge us to look beyond the literal and discover deeper truths. These accounts also find parallels in other religious traditions. In Buddhism, for instance, there are stories of the young Buddha demonstrating compassion and spiritual powers early in life. This connection between childhood and divinity appears to be a universal theme, where the extraordinary manifests from the very beginning. This raises a thought-provoking question. Do these stories reflect more about the expectations of the communities regarding Jesus or the realities of his childhood? As we consider the miracles attributed to Jesus' childhood, we see that they not only broaden our understanding of him, but also shape how faith is passed through generations. These acts, whether literal or symbolic, serve as seeds of hope pointing to something greater. And as we explore these accounts, an inevitable question arises. How did the apostles, who knew Jesus so intimately, perceive his childhood? Little is said about how the apostles viewed Jesus' early years, but there are hints that this fascinating period was part of the memories shared among them. Consider this. Mary, the mother of Jesus, living under the care of John, the beloved disciple, after the crucifixion, John 19:26-27. Would she have remained silent about her son's formative years? Of course not. John, deeply connected to Jesus' family, likely heard rich, detailed stories, preserved within the closest circles. He knew, perhaps better than anyone else, the wisdom and serenity that marked the early steps of the Savior. The apostles, guided by their direct experiences with Jesus, must have also pondered the divine traits revealed in his childhood. Hippolytus of Rome suggests that oral traditions preserved by the first-generation disciples contained fragments of stories about these mysterious years. Imagine the impact of hearing Peter, perhaps during a community gathering, recounting Mary's story about the time Jesus, still a boy, amazed the teachers at the temple with questions and answers that left them astounded. Luke 2:46-47. It was a glimpse of the Messiah growing under the law, but already transcending it. Eusebius of Caesarea points out that these family traditions were not just memories, but spiritual tools. He suggests that Mary, in her humility, shared profound and intimate details with the apostles, particularly about the events that shaped Jesus' youth. These stories, even if not recorded in the Gospels, formed the backdrop for the apostles' understanding of who Jesus was. Can you imagine Mary describing Jesus' patience as he worked alongside Joseph, or reflecting on how he navigated daily tensions with a wisdom that already pointed to his divine mission? Peter's letter, 1 Peter 1:20, echoes these reflections. When Peter mentions that Jesus was chosen before the foundation of the world, he reveals a theological depth that encompasses every aspect of Christ's life, including his childhood. It's not hard to imagine the apostles discussing these things among themselves, connecting familiar accounts with Old Testament prophecies such as Isaiah 11:6. A little child will lead them. They viewed Jesus' childhood not as a mere period of preparation, but as a stage where his mission was already at work. John D. Carson, with his unique role, seems to have been the guardian of an intimacy that the other apostles did not experience as deeply. His closeness to Mary placed him in a privileged position to understand the mysteries of Jesus' childhood. How might John have processed these details? As someone who wrote with profound symbolism, he likely saw Jesus' childhood as a living analogy, a light growing amidst darkness, a foretaste of the risen Christ. The transmission of these memories also reflects the ancient world, where traditions were passed orally with an almost sacred care. Mary, as both mother and the first witness of Jesus' life, was likely the most prominent storyteller of these accounts. Picture her describing to the apostles Jesus' curiosity, his quick learning, and even moments when he surprised everyone with insights about the scriptures. These were not just family stories, they were seeds of faith, carefully planted in the hearts of those who would carry Christ's message to the world. But what became of these accounts? Did the apostles record them in letters? Hippolytus suggests they might have, yet many of these texts were likely lost during persecutions or deemed unnecessary for inclusion in the canon. Nevertheless, oral traditions remained alive, enriching the theological and spiritual understanding of early Christian communities. This raises an intriguing question: how much of what we know today is merely a fraction of what was passed down? The story of the lost or suppressed writings about Jesus' childhood is a true enigma. Why did texts that could shed so much light on this lesser-known period of his life simply vanish? The destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD offers one explanation. When the Romans destroyed the temple and the city, it was not only a physical tragedy but also a cultural one. Many Judeo-Christian records were lost, burned or hidden in caves, perhaps waiting to be rediscovered centuries later, as with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The persecutions under Nero and Domitian also played a crucial role in this disappearance. Imagine the terror of early Christian communities, hunted and forced to decide which documents to protect at all costs. Letters that may have described simple episodes from Jesus' childhood might have been seen as less critical. Survival was at stake, and secondary texts were often destroyed or abandoned. This partly explains why more theological texts, like Paul's letters, endured, while others were lost. Church councils, such as the Council of Laodicea, 363 AD, also influenced the selection of what would be included in the canon. The Church sought doctrinal unity, and apocryphal texts about Jesus' childhood were seen as problematic. The infancy Gospel of Thomas, with its nearly unsettling accounts of miracles, and the Proto-Evangelium of James, with its emphasis on Mary's purity, were rejected for failing to align with the theological priorities of the time. These exclusions were not just matters of authenticity, but also of narrative control. This rejection was reaffirmed centuries later at the Council of Trent in 1546, which formalized the Catholic canon. Texts that might have provided details about Jesus' childhood were labeled apocryphal and pushed to the margins of theological discussions. However, the reasons for their exclusion go beyond doctrinal concerns. Many modern scholars, such as Elaine Pagels, suggest that political motives also played a role. Focusing on certain texts helped consolidate the Church's authority amid internal and external controversies. Recent discoveries, such as the Gospel of Judas, demonstrate that texts dismissed in the past were not necessarily less valuable. These documents reveal a richer panorama of the diversity of thought within early Christianity. They not only fill historical gaps, but also spark theological debates about what we consider inspired or relevant. The absence of these letters reminds us that what we have is only part of a much larger story. Another crucial factor was the geographic and cultural positioning of early Christian communities. Many of these letters may have been preserved in regions that suffered invasions or profound cultural shifts, such as Egypt or Asia Minor. Some churches, like the Ethiopian Church, still include apocryphal texts in their canon. This raises a compelling question: what else might be hidden or forgotten in unknown archives? These forgotten narratives are like pieces of a puzzle we are still trying to assemble. The loss of these letters also reflects something deeper: the fragility of human memory and the ongoing struggle between what should be remembered and what is left behind. If these letters ever existed, they were not only victims of persecution or conciliar decisions, but also of time itself. Yet their absence resonates as an invitation to discovery, as if Jesus' story could never be fully told, leaving space for mysteries that continue to inspire faith and curiosity. The relevance of these lost or suppressed letters about Jesus' childhood extends far beyond historical curiosity. Imagine having access to a text describing intimate moments from Jesus' youth, his interactions with Mary and Joseph, or even small gestures that reflected his divine nature. These writings could provide a renewed sense of humanity and closeness to Christ, whom many know only as an adult Savior. The gap left by these documents invites us to imagine and reflect on the fullness of Jesus' life. Recent discoveries, like the highly controversial Gospel of Jesus' wife, illustrate a global fascination with ancient texts. Archaeology and historical research continue to unearth documents that challenge traditional understandings. Churches such as the Ethiopian Church, which preserve apocryphal texts in their canon, offer narratives that could expand our perspective of faith. This prompts us to ask, could other communities in remote areas hold stories or writings that might illuminate forgotten aspects of Jesus' childhood? From a theological standpoint, lost texts could complement our understanding of Jesus as fully human and fully divine. Today, humanity yearns for connection, for stories that bridge the transcendent and the everyday. A narrative about Jesus' childhood that included his struggles and joys, common to all of us, could be transformative. Imagine how powerful it would be to read about a boy who helped his mother with daily chores, but also withdrew to pray with a celestial understanding of the Father. The debates between scholars like Bart Ehrman and N.T. Wright reflect this tension between the desire to expand historical knowledge and the need to preserve faith. Ehrman argues that many texts were discarded for political rather than theological reasons, while Wright defends the sufficiency of the current canon. But the question remains, if lost letters were found, how would they impact modern faith? For some, they would confirm truths already known. For others, they might serve as an invitation to doubt or to spiritual renewal. Beyond their theological impact, these letters would hold immense spiritual and emotional value for contemporary Christians. In a fragmented world where people yearn for authenticity and depth, accounts of Jesus' childhood could bring hope. A text showcasing his compassion from an early age, as seen in the miracles described in apocryphal writings, could inspire simple actions, being kinder in daily life or finding purpose in small things. These stories would remind us that great missions often begin with small acts of love and faith. The relevance of such writings also extends to interfaith dialogue. Other spiritual traditions feature narratives about the childhoods of divine or enlightened figures, such as the young Buddha or Krishna. These parallels could open new doors to mutual understanding and enriching discussions about the universality of the divine in the human experience. After all, Jesus did not live in a historical vacuum, but in a world rich with cultural and spiritual connections that still resonate today. Finally, the interest in lost texts is not just academic, it is deeply spiritual. They challenge us to go beyond what is written, to seek and question, and to find new ways to connect the ancient with the modern. These letters, if rediscovered, could transform not only our understanding of Jesus, but also how we relate to our own faith. They remind us that sacred history is not confined to the pages of a book, but lives in our ongoing pursuit of the divine. Now that we've explored the mysteries of the Apostles' lost letters, here's an invitation. How does this shape your view of Jesus' childhood and his divine mission? These forgotten stories not only connect us to the past, but also challenge us to deepen our faith today. Are you ready to seek more answers and reflect on what remains hidden between the lines of history? Think about this. What can you do to live Christ's teachings more deeply? Perhaps it's time to seek greater knowledge, share these stories with others, or even renew your connection with faith. Take this moment to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe these letters could reveal about Jesus? And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of learning. Activate notifications so you don't miss new content, and leave a like as a sign of support for spreading the word. Let's keep the curiosity alive and our desire to learn more about the faith that unites us. Until the next chapter of this spiritual journey, God bless you.